Good afternoon, Marco. Thank you for joining us from here in the Turkish Pavilion at the Venice Architecture Biennale. Marco is from Studio Folder, which is an agency for visual research founded by Marco Ferrari and Elisa Pascal in 2011. They help people visualize their ideas and concepts through a diverse range of work, including editorial, art, direction, exhibition design, brand identities, data visualization, websites, and digital publishing. They work on cultural and commercial projects from concept to solution for individuals and foundations, companies, and galleries of any size. They believe their work can contribute to the development of thoughtful ideas and the enrichment of cultural discourse in everyday life. And today, Marco will also be giving a preview of the project that they're working on for the 4th Istanbul Design Biennale. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Nadine, for the invitation and introduction. And hi, everyone. It's nice to meet you, even if, like, through these the drawer screens. Hope your workshop is going all right. So, as Nadine just said, we'd like to introduce a bit the work we're doing at the studio. So, Studio Folder is like a small design studio, I would say like design and research studio based in Milano. It's a design studio because we do lots of commission projects. So we deal with galleries, public institutions, museums, and other artists or architects to help them visualize their ideas. So we work like in diverse range of fields between exhibition design, editorial design, and design of website and digital platforms. And then on the other side, the activity of the studio is also like we engage in what we call research projects. So, for example, our invitation to the Istanbul Design Biennale is part of this activity, in which somehow we try to develop our own research interests and mainly interactive installations and design prototypes. So the two souls of the studio kind of influence each other in the sense that through the design develop skills and tools that then we use in the research part of our. So I would start with like a sort of like brief history of how before founding the studio and how it came to this kind of work after my graduation as an architect. First of all, I would like to start with this quote. And also, like, I just wanted to say before starting that if you need any kind of clarification, if you want to interrupt me with any questions in between the slides, just raise your hands or tell me something. So I would like to start with this quote from Orit Alpern, because I think it's a really effective in synthesizing what is my interest in the, let's say, in the way of thinking that architecture education has, and also like in somehow it's a sort of a formulation that really drive the kind of approach we have to contemporary design issues that we face to our projects. So I think I would say like our main interest is rooted in visualization. So the way somehow create context, and especially like a visual context to explain the complexity of some contemporary dynamics. And in this sense, this quote basically says that visions as a quality is something that is connected to the biological being. It's at the same time a very specific and very cultural, historical, and technical quality as well. So we can't actually describe something that we see. We can think about the visualization of something that we see without thinking about the context in which it happens. And by context, of course, we intend the culture, so the historical moment, and the techniques that have been used to collect the data and to represent this data again back. So somehow this consideration is underlying our entire approach to things. So how did I develop this kind of approach? Was mainly the beginning. After I finished university, I graduated in Venice, and I studied architecture for 5 years, and then I went to London to get a degree in architectural history. And then when I came back, we started to, with a few friends, like with a former architecture collective that we had that was based in Venice, and it was called Sotto Buono. For collaborated with the magazine Abitare. It's a design architecture magazine based in Milano. And we developed this, I would call it like this column. So this series of double spreads that were meant to illustrate every project that was presented in the magazine. The editor-in-chief of Abitare at the time, there was Stefano Boeri, asked us to came up with a sort of a new, or like I would say, like a new innovative method to that would have to be at the same time technical, so not losing detail and not losing the specificity of the architectural drawing in the way in which architecture dissect and explain things, but at the same time legible to a wider public. So use the drawing, but not in a technical way, but in explanatory way. We came up with this like sort of language we developed to the core collaboration with the magazine. So at the end of our collaboration, we came up with a couple of hundred of these double spreads, in which every month we tried to somehow give account on the design of the project, and also some facts that were connected to their story, to their narrative. So as you can see in this spread, I present here like a few of them. They are somehow constructed with a very strict language, graphical language. So the kind of design choices that we gave ourselves was very limited. So try to use axonometric drawings as much as possible, because axonometrics is a very precise and legible language. Also can be measured. So anything designed in axonometrics is scalable, so you can understand exactly the scale of it. And then have a mix, a kind of more precise illustrations, talking about the detail of the construction, diagrammatic language on the other side. So some other schemes, some other diagrams that would explain some particular features of the connection to like the cultural environment where the client was coming from, or the commissioner, or like what the function of the building was about. So over the course of these 4 years, we managed to illustrate any kind of, like every kind of different objects, from buildings to city plans to objects. Like for example, this one, there was a design project of a guitar. The body of a guitar that was milled from a single block of aluminum, and we somehow by always keeping the same very dry and very simple graphical language, we experimented a lot with drawings. So we tried to build a sort of a catalog of possible drawing solutions for representing any kind of object somehow. So in the end, I think this was an amazing exercise in building sort of an encyclopedia of idea connected to the way in which we can represent reality. And also like an exercise in variations, because we needed to create a lot of solutions and iterations, but by keeping the grammar of our language, the alphabet of our language, very simple. So it was like a very helpful exercises in producing ideas through a very, very limited set of tools. Then after this few years of collaboration in the editorial field, my experience in working with magazines continued, and I moved from Abitare to Domus. And my collaboration with Domus magazine started in 2011, when Joseph Grima, which you may know, the curator, became editor-in-chief of Domus magazine, and he called me to work with him on the new design of the magazine. So for Domus, I did like a slightly different job than with Abitare, because I took care of first of all, the graphic design of the whole magazine. And then like from month to month, I was art directing the magazine with him. Contribution to Domus was more like on a different level, in the sense that I didn't design any particular content of the magazines, but I somehow I was the one designing the whole issue. So understanding which kind of visual content we should focus on, and what we could be like the proper way of representing every content in every issue. So I think one of the contributions that we did, we brought to the magazine the most, was the introduction of information design. So the idea that the most complex content of every issue could be in a visual way that besides text and photographs, dense and informative. Especially because this was like very much in line with the new editor's vision, because Joseph pushed a lot in making Domus a magazine not just about architectural projects, but about architecture as culture. So there was a lot of contents that were related to technology, for example. Lots of contents about understanding how design was intertwined with many other disciplines nowadays, but also in the course of the history of the 20th century. So was like his issues were issues where it was very difficult to define what were the boundaries of architecture. So I think some of the contribution of bringing information design to explain most of these issues have been helpful in conveying this complexity. So these are just examples we designed. And then like halfway through my art direction of the magazine, I took care of the design of the digital version. So back in 2012, now saying this seems a bit old-fashioned, but like in 2012, everyone was looking at the iPad as the new platform for delivering editorial products. So we had to design like a completely new. So we put a lot of effort understanding a way how to enrich the design, and especially with information design. So again, like translating a lot of content into drawings, quantitative information, and statistics. And again, we did like a big research in understanding how architectural drawing could live on a very different format than paper, which was a tiny screen of an iPad, and the way in which we could interact with the drawings. So drawings in Domus for the iPad had a lot of space and a prominent space. So there was like, for example, a specific section for every project in which the reader could explore drawings of the building that were published in a very thorough way. So each of these drawings were completely redesigned by us with the constant language. And then these images are like from the last issue of the magazine. So the last issue we designed was a very special one, because it was all about mainly technology. Somehow like the heritage of Joseph's direction of Domus was then the understanding of how technology is like one of the main forces that shape our life. And then for the last issue, this is the cover of the last issue of the magazine, which from summer 2013. We did like a sort of a very special report. So we commissioned a submarine photographer, and in this image on the cover shows a part of this mission. So we commissioned this guy to go 11 kilometers out of the shore of the Adriatic Sea, in the middle of the sea, to shoot some pictures of the remains of this building. This building, which is called Isola delle Rose, the Rose Islands, was a maritime platform that was built in the 60s by an Italian engineer with the utopia of declaring it an autonomous state. So basically transform this platform into a new nation. There would have been like completely Italian state, and have like its own regulations, its own money, its own all like the different constituent parts of a nation state. Atom had a very short life because the Italian authorities destroyed it after a few months. It was built, but still its remains are sit on the seabed of the Adriatic Sea. So for this issue, we opened the last issue of Joseph Thomas with this report about this project. So this is for me, like, I mean, a very interesting story because it was a big effort and also was kind of amazing to imagine that an architectural magazine can still produce such great content with such originality and like producing like new images and do this sort of adventures. But also because it introduces like a kind of theme that we as a studio folder, we have been developing quite a lot in the past few years, which is the topic of the relationship between nation states, borders, and autonomy. So, and which I would like to introduce to you through the story of this project, which also shows the way in which we, as a studio, we work in the research domain. So the kind of the methodology of work that we've been developing for addressing this kind of research topics. So the title of this project is Italian Limes, and it's a project that we started to work on in 2014, so 4 years ago now. And we started because we were invited initially to present a proposal for the Venice Biennial curated by Ryan Colas. So the topic of the part of the exhibition where we were invited to was about analyzing Italy as a sort of a stereotype, or like as a sort of like national case study for different topics about the contemporary situation. So each of the invited guests was asked to present proposals about one specific place and one topic. What we proposed in the beginning was to not to focus on a specific place, so one place, but like to focus on the border of the country. And we took this decision because somehow we wanted to explore a particular condition that 4 years ago, but even before, was starting to emerge very clearly. So basically, I would like to illustrate with this couple of images. So we wanted to somehow investigate how we moved from a situation like this one, in which the border of a country, of a European country, before the Schengen agreements, or before their these political agreements between European countries, not anymore, have to be. So we moved from a situation like this one, in which like a national border was visible, was like a physical architecture that was tracing, a threshold between two territories, to something like this. And this somehow is a situation that might not be still present in the near future, given all the political turmoil that is happening nowadays because of migrations and the discussion about borders. But somehow this is the actual situation in which these borders between European countries are almost invisible in the territory, so kind of vanished, disappeared as architectures, but are still present on a map. So how can we think about the border in which on one side, if you look at the map, lines are still there, so the borders are still clearly visible on the map. The one we experience crossing a border on the land, we don't see almost anything. So our proposal got accepted, and what we started to do for the research was we went to the archives of the National Geographic Agency of Italy, which is like a geographic agency, in the sense that it's which is still part of the army in Italy, that with the role of producing official cartography of the country, of producing basically any kind of cartographic document and survey about the territory of the country. We went there because we wanted to learn about the way in which a border is created. So we wanted to understand what is a border in the first place from a political and geographical perspective. And what we found in the archives were very interesting, because we were able, with the help of the geographers that helped us to browse through all the materials, to reconstruct the history of the border. And this image that you see here is a picture of from the 30s, in which you see like the first operations for the tracing of the border in the Alps. So in which like these kind of lines through the peaks of the mountains and through snow and glaciers had to be traced in order to take the measures between the different points of the border. And this archive is really interesting because it's composed like of many different materials, from maps to photographs to reports and diaries of the campaigns, of the survey campaigns. It's really like a picture of the country of the past. So it's a sort of a continuous photograph through these materials of how the landscape of the country changed and the way in which it was surveyed. So also it's very interesting because it's a sort of a history of the technology that in the past 150 years was used, and how it evolved in order to measure the country, to measure and represent the country. So we look at a lot of maps. For example, this is like a very beautiful example of how the border was represented in the 50s. In this case, the border between Iran, the former Republic of Yugoslavia, in which you see the border represented as sort of this cartographic snake, in which the red line at the center of the image is the border itself, and then the territory is described with this amazing level of detail on both sides. And then, as I was said, like the evolution of technology. So the kind of the manual operations and the manual survey that was the only way which we could measure the country before the advent of satellites and GPS changed completely in the 90s, when, again, like every feature of the geography of the state was resurveyed again in order to transform all the maps into digital coordinates. So these images are, again, images from the archive, in which you can see this incredible effort of remeasuring the whole country to GPS instrument with GPS instruments. Can you still hear me? You follow? Yeah, okay. So after all these like few months of research, and we encountered a very, let's say, like a very interesting fact. So while looking at the images, at one point we came up to this image, which again is part of the archive, and which shows like a very, so in this image you see two borders. So this image is taken like in a very north part of Italy, at the border between Italy and Austria, and you see a glacier, which you can tell is like is melting away from the mountain, basically is retiring. And then two borders, a red border, which is the previous border, and a new border, which is the yellow line. So basically what happened? It happened that in the early 2000s, the geographer of the state realized that, as you know, alpine glacier at a high pace, at a very fast pace. So a lot is changing in the Alps in terms of the topography of the territory and the shape of the mountains, because a lot of these glaciers are basically melting and disappearing, or changing their geometry quite and important. It's important. Most part of the border of Italy in the north runs on glaciers, so sits on these glaciers that because these glaciers are part of the watershed line. So the kind of geographical abstractions that divides that in many parts of Europe has been chosen as the natural border between countries. So if these glaciers are moving, it means that the geometry is changing and the position of this watershed line is also changing. Since this is happening like at such a wide scale, like all across the Alps, this is becoming a problem because it's a national border that is moving. So what do you see in the fact that this line is moving on the territory, because these glaciers are completely changing the geography of the place, it doesn't correspond anymore to the maps. For example, you can see the other place from a satellite image in which you see two lines, again, border that was traced between the two countries in the 20s. And the blue line, the blue dots, are the new measurement done with GPS that says that this glacier in a way, and the geometry of the border changed according to this shape. So what happened? In order to make the maps responding to the topography again, the Italian government was forced to do a new law, and basically saying that since the glaciers are moving so fast and so in such an unpredictable way, we need to come up with a new definition of a border. So this law that was approved in 2008 says that the Italian border is now mobile, because since the glaciers are moving so fast, we cannot follow them with the measurements, and so we just need to adapt the border wherever they move. So this started of course, agreed with the neighboring countries. So it was an agreement between Switzerland, Italy, and Austria and Italy to acknowledge this fact. And so they together determined and saying that the border is now mobile. This caused a new campaign, so in which all these melting glaciers had to be sort of a base measurement for the new border. So in these images, you can see the geographers that have been dropped in different parts of the measures. And again, these are another image from a very remote place in the Alps where these geographers are surveying the new border and the glaciers. So for us, this let's say this anecdote, this glitch in the system, somehow this fact, initially seemed like sort of a fun effect, so something that is almost weird to find, no? Because it seems that no one should bother if a border moves for a few hundred meters, very high in the Alps, because no one really is really living in these places and really crossing these places. But after a few weeks of reflections, we realized that actually this was the core of our project. It could have been the core of our project, because somehow brings together a lot of different topics in the same place, because through which we can talk about, of course, the effect of climate change. So how this huge object, this sort of hyper object, is changing our one of the most stable thing that we could think about, which is a national border of a state. So the relationship to politics, also the relationship between the territory and cartography. So the way in which the two things communicate with each other, and about technology, because somehow the fact that determining the movement of these glaciers is also part of the problem, no? If you think about it. So the fact that we have such sophisticated instruments like GPS surveying tools that allow us to take track of the movement of these glaciers almost in real time is also something that binds us to this sort of delirium of measurements. So transform all this research and these reflections in the Biennale. So since we have to build an exhibitions, we decided to do interactive installations, in which the purpose was to represent in real time the border. So somehow give to the visitor of the exhibit they were witnessing almost in real time in the place of the exhibition, the movement of this border. So we built a few sensors. So we decided to build some device, and these are the components, and these are what they're looking like once assembled. This is part of an interior. This is one of the final devices. So these devices were designed to be placed on one of these glaciers across the border between Italy and Austria, and keep track of the movement of the surface, basically through remote connection, through GSM connections. Every hour, send a message where their position was communicated. So basically, we organized expeditions with a few of us scientists and glaciologists that helped us to conceive. Can you hear me?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Hello and welcome.
Hi.
I know that Italian Limes project is one of your best known projects, and also this year's Biennale's concept topic is free space. And this morning we also argued about the freedom, free space, what is the boundaries and barriers inside of our minds, or physical boundaries and barriers. So as you tell, it's a very abstract view of how we define the boundaries. But what are you thinking about this year's Biennale topic, and how can you relate it with your project and boundaries and the free space concept? Thank you.
So I couldn't hear the last. Few words. Can you just repeat?
Of course. How you define and how you observe about the free space concept and the boundaries that we create in an abstract way, and also this year's Biennale. Yeah, Architecture Biennale for Venice.
Yeah, so I haven't seen this yet. So I think I'll miss important information. So I know a bit about the topic, but I haven't seen I just paid a very, very quick visit in the opening days, but just I couldn't see almost anything. Sure how these relate to the concept of in general. If the topic of borders is somehow addressed in this Biennale, from which perspective, and so I can't tell this. And in terms of like, I don't know if your question is also about the relationship of this project, Italian Limes, with the way in which architecture thinks about free space in general. I don't know if this is part of what you were asking.
Yes, what architecture thinks free space is in general.
I don't know. It's a really difficult question. So I'm not sure I cannot also, because it's again like maybe not having seen the Biennale this year. I'm not very sure if we can find a single definition for free space. What actually is free space? So if it's like a space of the collectivity where we can all enjoy the same rules and privileges and possibilities, so there might be one definition. So in the sense, somehow, like with a very free associations of meaning, but I would say that Italian Limes is one of the main purposes to demonstrate the absurdity of borders in general. No, that somehow the way in which 20th century geopolitics and also 20th century surveying disciplines, and in the surveying disciplines, I would say architecture, because somehow I think architecture is complicit within the 20th century paranoia of defining borders. this thing is completely nonsense, no? And somehow it took climate change somehow with its disruptive power is one of the elements and one of the events that helped us to determine the absurdity of all these operations. Somehow within, like in front of this huge event, incontrollable events, this kind of approach towards the understanding of nature, the measurement of nature, kind of collapse. So in this sense, I think the only way through which architecture can think about the space is like by trying to being much more inclusive in the way in which we take into account measurement representations.
Yeah, thank you so much. I believe that's shared the same ideas with you, because the boundaries and barriers is an abstract idea and it can always be defined very differently and change. So I think Eyüp also has a question. So.
Hello, just something similar to Gökçe said. It's about this border project. There is this lady from Center of Spatial Research of Columbia University, Laura Kurgan.
Yeah.
Maybe you have heard of her?
Yeah, I know her. Yeah, very well.
She stated in one of her books that the GPS is the perfect demonstration of Einstein's relativity theory, because GPS is not static, it's just positioning itself according to another location, because the locations, whenever just any place on the Earth constantly moves due to the how to say, the movement on the Earth crust. Even the land masses like Alps moves constantly. So I think they just position on the borders is also a perfect example to demonstrate the nature of GPS. And then I have another question.
I'm not sure I got your question because the connection is a bit.
Another question. I just wanted to comment on it, but I
think I got it then.
Okay. This is about the data visualization part of your work. Do you use any software to do these visualizations, or do you do them manually?
Of course, it depends a lot on the output. So, for example, in the first examples I showed you, the one about from Vitare, so the one about the architectural drawings and design illustrations, mostly they were like we worked a lot with the 3D modeling software and then rendered in Illustrator. So it was like mostly design drawing workflow. There were some data visualization, but were very limited and small. So, okay, thanks. So in that case, we're mostly doing that manually. Then in Domos, we did like some more sophisticated things. Some of them were done in processing, just for the elaboration of data sets, and then mostly Illustrator. So I have to say, like all our approach is very, very humanistic, I would say. So we don't usually all the data we use are they're not huge data sets, fairly simple tools, and like a lot of presentation, a lot of work in Illustrator, mostly to make them legible and to highlight the patterns that we want to emerge from the data. So I think I have I don't know if you have any other questions, but I think I only have 5 minutes and nothing said. So maybe I'll finish to show this, and then we can have like a few more. Let me know if you have a further question now. I can hear you. Sorry.
Yeah, you can finish first, and I'll ask after.
Okay. Okay. Good. So yeah, maybe just to finish this. So as I said, so we dropped these sensors on the glaciers, and we left. So this is what they look like in the environment. So they were designed to basically work as a grid of 25 different points, and this grid was sort of a low resolution representation of the surface of the glacier. And then we from these sensors, and then we designed. Let me show you this. So for the exhibition space, we designed a drone that was connected to the same server where the sensors were sending the data. And this machine was able to download this data every hour and design a line of the border that was updated according to the latest coordinates from the sensors. So the installation was a way basically to produce a sort of real-time cartography of the glacier moving and of the border line in its most updated geometry. Every map was time-stamped, so every map had the date and hour where the visitor was able to take its own map. So basically produce machine its own cartography of the border. Then installation had some other elements, as you can see from this picture. So there were like a physical model of the mountain, of the same glaciers, where there was a projection with animations of the evolution of a different cartographic representation of the same place. And then that central part with the glass was a collection of archival documents. So a collection of documents that were explaining the history of the border and the technology that were used to measure it. So yeah, maybe I will finish this with this. So the project then had an evolution. So we kind of continue working on it in the past years, and now we're working on a book about it. So a book that will somehow move from the experience of this project and expand on the topics with the contributions of other, basically a few professors that have been asked to write some text about the themes of this project raises. Shortly about the Istanbul Biennale, I don't have any images to show, but the project on which we're working on, again, has to do with the topic of maps and measures in particular. And we're looking at the Bosphorus as a site, so in particular the kind of the maritime area around Istanbul as a sort of like as a data environment. So as an environment in which there is continuously traversed by different objects, in particular ships, that produce like data while they travel, and how these data are communicated, broadcasted, and then used to understand the geography of the whole, like the physical geography of the ocean, is really interesting for us. So we're trying to somehow build some maps about. I wouldn't say just the traffic of the Bosphorus, but like some maps about of the sea, drawn and designed through the data collected by the ships. And the project would be also like a sort of reflections about our capacity to predict the, let's say, like the conditions through which the oceans are experienced. Because somehow navigations, since the beginning of times, has been the most important field where the prediction of the natural condition of the environment, so the prediction of the weather, for example, the prediction of the optimal route has been tightly connected to our understanding of natures and the tools that we use to compute natures, and also the capitalistic value of things. Somehow the prediction in navigations is always also tightly connected to the economical value of the stuff, of the goods that is transported by the ships. So we try to build a sort of like a few visualizations that ties together all these different aspects. Yeah, I think it's we're finished. I finished my time, but we can continue eagerly with questions if you have some.
Yeah, I guess my question is also about the first project you were talking about. I was wondering what happened to the afterlife of this border, since like now the state has changed the water. I was wondering if Italy has proposed like any legislation to claim the rights of the water, which was once the borderland.
So yeah, the legislation is actually let's say the drive of the whole operation somehow, because so when they realized that this border was these glaciers were changing the border, they had to come up with an idea of how to acknowledge this change in the cartography, because somehow they couldn't leave the old maps with a border that was not anymore reflected on the territory. So like in older times, so before this law of the mobile border, which actually is the name of the law of the mobile border, the process, the normal process would have been that like surveyors of the two countries, for example, Italy and Austria, would have had to agree to every of the border on the land. So would have been like a very, very long and complex diplomatic process in which every country had to survey the border and agree on the changes. And then if there was any change in favor of Italy, for example, Italy would have to give another equal amount of the area to other country. So there would have been like a constant exchange of land between the two countries, because according to the previous law, a country cannot be, the area of the country, the territory of the country cannot be reduced or enlarged according to border modifications. So since this would have been impossible, because the border is constantly changing because of climate change, and there were like so many different places where this border had changed, they came up with this idea of the mobile border. So the law was the actual innovation. So the law basically says that since nature is changing all the time, and it's changing so fast because of climate change, we just basically we follow the rule of nature. So we follow the fact that where the glacier moved, there is a new border. So every few years, there will be like new surveys in which the border will be measured, and this will be reflected into cartography without any further change. So I think like it's from a law perspective, legal perspective, the law is a very brilliant, but also like very practical thing. On a more, I would say, like philosophical perspective, it's really interesting because on one side it resolves the problem, on the other side it completely undermines the very idea of the border, because it says that the border is impossible to measure. So the border is always mobile, hence non-existing. So I think like it's conceptually is a very interesting case to look at.
Yeah, I guess like I was also trying to ask what happened to the melted land, which now turned into water. Like, did Italy claim more of the water, or did it? Is it already like Italy's water?
I didn't get this part of the question. So it's so the hydrography, I think, is maybe the most important part of the whole the consequences of climate change in the Alps. So the way in which the regime of water is changing. So of course we are talking about relatively small quantities. Even if the glaciers are quite big, it's very difficult to determine the volume of water, because it varies a lot over the course of the years. But somehow the importance of tracing this border is also relevant in this case, because if it changes the topography high up in the mountains, then it might change as well the direction of the water. There's not any claim between nations about this, but just I think it's part of the way in which they're trying keeping an eye on these dynamics, because in case they become a problem in spring and summer, when these glaciers will melt like a lot more than the previous years. So I think it's just a matter of understanding if there is like a huge change in topography. So for example, huge masses of ice will discharge their waters on a different valley, for example, in different directions compared to previous geography. But I think this is an important question. For example, in other parts of the world where there are similar problems, in Malaya also there are huge of the border between Pakistan and China, for example, in India, where the border is completely uncertain because there wasn't precision in the first place, and where masses of ice are much bigger. For population that lives off of glaciers is very important.
Thank you so much, Marco. Unfortunately, we have to wrap up because we've got the next call in 4 minutes. Clearly the students were very stimulated, and I think they have more questions, but maybe we can discuss here and get back to you if we have anything more that we'd like to ask.
Yeah, sure. Reply.
Great. Thank you so much, and see you soon in Istanbul.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, bye-bye.